A lavish charity gala turns into tragedy when a furious millionaire pushes his pregnant wife down a marble staircase in front of hundreds of guests. Screams echo, cameras flash, and rain pounds against the windows as she lies motionless on the cold floor. But he isn't done. In a fit of rage, he grabs her, yanks open the front door, and shouts as he throws her out into the storm. What he doesn't know is that outside, hidden in the darkness, someone is watching every second, the one man powerful enough to make him pay. What follows is a storm of truth, justice, and redemption that shakes the entire city. Stay with us, because this story will take your breath away. Tell us what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. Under the heavy summer sky of Charleston, thunder rolled like a warning from above. The Blackwell mansion glowed across the marshlands, its marble columns shining under the storm lights. Inside, crystal chandeliers trembled as the wind pressed against the glass. The ballroom pulsed with music, laughter, and the scent of champagne. It was Ethan Blackwell's charity gala, an event meant to showcase power, wealth, and perfection. Every guest in the city's elite was there. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked, and Ethan stood at the center of it all, smiling as if he owned the world. His black tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his words smooth and practiced. He was the man who built towers and broke competitors, the man who believed he could control every story about him. But beneath the surface, his eyes were restless, his smile too sharp. He raised his glass and toasted to new beginnings, while the storm outside began to howl. The double doors opened. For a moment, the room fell silent. Rachel Whitmore stood at the entrance, wearing a light sky-blue gown that caught the shimmer of the chandeliers. Her long brown hair clung to her shoulders, slightly damp from the rain. One hand rested gently on her rounded belly, the other held a small clutch. She looked calm, but her heart beat fast. She had not planned to come. Yet something had told her tonight would reveal the truth she had been afraid to face. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some guests looked away, uneasy. Others smiled politely, pretending not to know what the tabloids had been whispering for months. Rachel walked slowly across the marble floor, her heels tapping in rhythm with the orchestra. The air seemed to tighten with every step. Ethan turned. For a brief instant, surprise crossed his face, then disappeared behind his practiced grin. "Rachel," he said with false warmth, "you look lovely tonight." Her voice was soft, but steady. "I wasn't sure if I'd still be welcome in my own home." Laughter rippled uncomfortably among the guests. Ethan's jaw tightened. Before he could respond, a figure in a crimson dress appeared behind him. Camila Rhodes, young and radiant, leaned close to whisper something into his ear. Her lipstick matched the color of her wine. Her hand lingered on his shoulder a little too long. Rachel stopped a few steps away. The music continued, but it sounded distant, hollow. "So that's how it is now," she said quietly. Ethan set his glass down. "Not here," he muttered. "We'll talk upstairs." But Camila smiled, enjoying the attention. "Oh, let her speak. She seems to have something on her mind." Her voice was honey and venom. The crowd froze. A waiter hesitated with a tray, unsure where to move. Rachel's face remained calm, though her eyes glistened. "I just wanted to see what kind of man my husband has become." Ethan's composure cracked. "Enough!" he snapped. "This is not the time or the place." Her words came low but clear. "Then when is the time, Ethan? Between your parties or your lies?" The tension snapped like a wire. Guests began to back away. Camila tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Maybe she shouldn't be standing so much," she said sweetly. "Stress isn't good for the baby." Rachel turned to her, the calm in her tone sharper than any scream. "I can stand just fine, but thank you for pretending to care." Camila's smirk faded. Ethan grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her slightly aside. "You're embarrassing yourself," he hissed. "Go home." "I am home," she replied. Lightning flashed through the tall windows, and thunder shook the walls. Rain began to hammer the glass, drowning the music. The chandelier flickered. Rachel looked around the room that used to be hers, every corner filled with strangers. "My father built this house for us," she said softly. "And you've turned it into a theater for your lies." Ethan's face reddened. "Don't start with that sentimental nonsense," he growled. "You have no idea how hard I work to keep this life running." Camila stepped closer, her perfume thick and sharp. "Maybe she should thank you instead," she said. "Not every man would tolerate such a dramatic wife." Rachel's chest rose and fell. She wanted to walk away, to leave the humiliation behind, but something in Ethan's smirk kept her rooted. He enjoyed the power, the control. "Say something," he demanded, "or are you too fragile to speak without crying?" Her voice came like calm rain over fire. "I'm not fragile. I'm just done pretending this is love." The words struck harder than any slap. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then Ethan's rage ignited. He stepped forward, his face inches from hers. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he said, his breath hot with alcohol. "You owe everything to me. Without me, you're nothing. Lend." Rachel's hand trembled, not from fear but from disbelief. "Without you," she whispered, "I might finally be free." The crowd gasped. Camila muttered something under her breath. Ethan's control shattered completely. He pushed her shoulder once, hard enough to make her stumble. Gasps spread like wildfire. She steadied herself, one hand on the marble railing, trying to catch her breath. Ethan moved again, his voice rising. "You want freedom? Here it is. Lun." Before anyone could react, he shoved her with both hands. The sound of her body hitting the stairs was louder than the thunder outside. A scream ripped through the ballroom. Her clutch flew across the floor, scattering lipstick and photographs. Rachel tried to breathe, but pain surged through her abdomen. Her hands clutched her belly instinctively. Somewhere, Camila screamed, "Ethan, stop!" But he stood frozen, his face blank, his fury spent. Guests rushed forward. Someone called for help. The orchestra fell silent. Outside, lightning illuminated the long driveway, where a black car sat parked across the street. Inside, an older man watched through the rain-streaked windshield, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Robert Whitmore, Rachel's father, had seen everything. His eyes burned not with shock, but with cold, deliberate fury. He reached for his phone, pressed record, and whispered to himself, "Now you'll know what justice feels like." Len. Back inside, Ethan threw open the mansion doors. Rain and wind burst in, tearing through the polished hall. "Get her out!" he shouted. "Out of my house!" Two servants hesitated, terrified. Rachel tried to speak but only coughed, her dress soaked in tears and rain. The storm roared louder, as if the sky itself had turned against him. Ethan slammed the door behind her and disappeared into the ballroom, where silence hung like smoke. Outside, Rachel lay on the cold stone steps. The rain mixed with blood and water on her trembling hands. In the distance, the thunder rolled again. She whispered one broken word, barely audible through the storm. "Father." And across the street, Robert Whitmore started his engine. The storm had begun, and this time, it would not end until justice was served. Rain poured over the stone steps, washing away the traces of blood. Rachel lay motionless, her hand clutching her belly, her dress soaked and torn. The mansion door was shut behind her, and thunder rolled above the marshes. Across the street, the headlights of a car blinked once, then turned off. Inside that car, Robert Whitmore threw open his door and ran toward her. "Rachel!" His voice broke through the storm. He knelt beside her, his suit drenched instantly. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, unfocused. "The baby," she whispered weakly. Robert pressed his trembling fingers to her neck. There was still a pulse. Relief and panic clashed in his chest. He looked around wildly, then pulled out his phone. "This is Judge Robert Whitmore," he shouted into it. "Send an ambulance to Blackwell Manor, River Point Drive. Pregnant woman injured, possible internal bleeding." The dispatcher's calm voice tried to cut through the noise. "Stay with her, sir. Help is on the way." He took off his coat and placed it over her body, shielding her from the rain. "Hold on, sweetheart. Don't close your eyes." His voice cracked as he pressed his hand over her stomach. "You and the baby, you'll be fine. Do you hear me?" Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the distant siren rose above the thunder. Red and blue lights pierced the darkness. Robert waved frantically as the ambulance turned the corner and stopped at the gate. Two paramedics jumped out, wheeling a stretcher through the rain. "She's 30 weeks pregnant," Robert said, his voice trembling. "She fell, hard, down the stairs. Or rather, she was pushed." The paramedics didn't ask questions. "Let's get her inside," one said quickly. They lifted her carefully onto the stretcher. Rachel winced as pain tore through her abdomen. Her hand found Robert's for a moment. "Don't! Let him near me!" "I won't," he said, his voice steady now. "You're safe, Mo." The doors slammed shut, and the ambulance sped away through the flooded streets. Robert followed in his car, keeping the flashing lights in sight the entire way. At Charleston Memorial Hospital, nurses waited under the covered entry, their shoes splashing through puddles. The back doors burst open, and a flood of rain followed them inside. "Pregnant trauma! Possible placental tear!" one medic shouted. "We're losing pressure!" "Oh!" They wheeled her through the automatic doors into the blinding brightness of the emergency wing. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Voices overlapped, orders fired like bullets. "Get OB on standby!" Fetal heart rate unstable. "She's going into shock." Ethan arrived minutes later, drenched but still holding the poise of a man used to command. His driver held an umbrella over his head as he walked in. He brushed past the reception desk. "Where's my wife?" he demanded. "I'm Ethan Blackwell. She should be in surgery by now." A nurse gestured toward the trauma room. "They're working on her. Please wait outside." "I don't wait," Ethan said sharply. "I pay for this hospital's new wing. I want updates every minute." The nurse's eyes hardened. "Then you should let the doctors do their job." Inside the trauma bay, Rachel's heart monitor beeped erratically. A doctor in a green surgical gown leaned over her. "Stay with us, Mrs. Blackwell." Deep breaths. A nurse moved the Doppler across her abdomen, searching desperately for the baby's heartbeat. The silence was unbearable. Then a faint rhythm appeared, weak but real. "Got it," the nurse said. "The baby's holding on." Outside, Ethan paced the hallway, his phone glued to his ear. "Listen to me," he said to his assistant. "If anyone asks," she slipped. "There was no fight, and call Channel 5. Make sure they only air my statement." A flashbulb burst through the glass doors as reporters gathered under the rain. Ethan adjusted his tie and prepared the perfect face of a grieving husband. "It's a terrible accident," he told the cameras. "My wife fell at home. Please respect our privacy." Back inside, Robert stood by a vending machine, drenched and trembling. When a nurse walked by, he stopped her. "Rachel Whitmore, which room?" "She's being moved to recovery," the nurse said gently. "She'll live, but she's weak." Robert exhaled for the first time in an hour. "Can I see her?" "She needs rest, sir. Only family." "I am family," he said. "I'm her father." The nurse hesitated. "Her chart says her father passed away." Robert met her eyes, calm but unyielding. "Then consider this a resurrection." Moments later, he stood beside Rachel's bed. Machines hummed softly around her. Her lips were pale, her pulse fragile under his fingertips. He sat down, resting his hand over hers. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You did nothing wrong." Outside, footsteps echoed. Ethan appeared at the door. "What are you doing here?" he asked sharply. Robert didn't rise. "Watching over my daughter." Ethan froze. "You? You're supposed to be dead." "Dead to you, maybe," Robert replied. His voice was calm but carried weight. "Not to her." Ethan's mask cracked for the briefest second. "You shouldn't be here. You'll upset her." "She's already upset," Robert said evenly. "And you're the reason." Ethan's face hardened. "Careful with your accusations." Robert leaned forward slightly. "I saw you, Ethan. Every second of it. I saw you push her." The words hit like thunder. Ethan's jaw clenched. "You have no proof." Robert pulled out his phone and held it up. "I have all the proof I need." For a moment, the only sound was the heart monitor's steady beep. Ethan's eyes darted toward the hallway. Too many witnesses, too much attention. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll talk later," he said quietly. "You're emotional." Robert's reply was ice. "No, Ethan, I'm focused." Ethan turned and walked away, his shoes echoing down the corridor. Robert stayed beside Rachel, brushing a wet strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred faintly. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm here." Tears filled her eyes. "You came back." "I never stopped watching," he whispered. "I just waited for the right time." Her lips quivered. "The baby?" He looked at the monitor. The rhythmic pulse glowed green in the dark. "She's fighting, just like her mother." Rachel exhaled shakily, her body relaxing. "Don't let him near me." "I won't," he promised. You rest now. The storm's over for you. Let me face it this time." Outside the room, thunder rolled one last time before fading into silence. In that stillness, Robert Whitmore's eyes hardened. He had spent years in hiding. Now, he knew what came next. Justice was no longer a word. It was personal. Morning crept slowly over Charleston Memorial Hospital. The storm had passed, but the sky still hung low and gray. The streets outside were slick with rainwater, reflecting the pale light of dawn. Inside room 217, the steady rhythm of a heart monitor filled the silence. Rachel Whitmore lay still against the white sheets, her skin color returning slowly from ghostly gray to a faint blush. The oxygen mask fogged slightly with each breath. A vase of lilies stood by the window, untouched, their scent too strong for the small room. Her eyelashes trembled, her fingers moved, the beeping quickened. She opened her eyes. For a few seconds, she could not remember where she was. The light above her was too bright, the walls too white. Then the pain in her ribs returned, and memory came flooding back. The fall, the marble stairs, the rain, Ethan's voice. Her hand went immediately to her stomach. For one heartbeat she was terrified to feel nothing. Then a faint movement pushed gently against her palm. The baby was still there. Tears slipped from her eyes before she could stop them. The door opened quietly. Robert Whitmore stepped inside. He looked exhausted, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. His hair was disheveled, and a coffee cup trembled in his hand. But when he saw her eyes open, relief broke through the tiredness. "Rachel," he said softly. Her lips moved, dry and cracked. "Dad." He set the cup down and moved closer, taking her hand carefully. "You're safe now," he said. "They stopped the bleeding. The doctors said the baby's strong." Rachel closed her eyes, the tears spilling again. "I thought I lost her," she whispered. "You didn't," he said. "She's still fighting, just like her mother." The warmth in his voice steadied her. She looked at him for a long time, unable to speak. Years of silence hung between them, heavy and unspoken. "I thought you were dead," she finally said. "They told me you died overseas." "I wanted them to think that," Robert replied quietly. "It was the only way I could protect what was left of our name. Ethan had already started to destroy everything I built." Rachel stared at the wall. "You knew what he was like?" "I suspected," he said, "but I never imagined he would turn his violence toward you." He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "When I saw him last night, when I saw what he did, I realized staying away was my worst mistake." Her fingers tightened around his. "You came back," she said. "I never really left," he murmured. "I've been watching him for months. I just didn't know how bad it had become." The room fell quiet. The monitor kept its calm, steady rhythm. Outside the window, the first rays of light began to cut through the fog. Nurses passed in the hallway, their shoes clicking softly against the tile. Life was returning to normal, but nothing in Rachel's world felt normal anymore. After a while, a nurse entered with a chart in hand. "Good morning," she said with a gentle smile. "How are we feeling today?" "Tired," Rachel answered weakly. "But better." The nurse checked the monitors, adjusted the IV, and nodded. "Your vitals look stable. The baby's heart rate is strong. You're lucky, Mrs. Blackwell." Rachel's expression hardened at the name. "It's Whitmore," she said quietly. "Rachel Whitmore." The nurse paused, then nodded with understanding. "All right, Miss Whitmore. We'll keep you under observation for another day, just to be safe." When she left, Robert sat down again. "She's right," he said. "You're lucky, but you can't stay here forever. Ethan still has influence in this city. He'll try to twist this." Rachel stared at the blanket covering her legs. "He already is," she said softly. "I saw the news. They're calling it an accident." Robert nodded grimly. "He's buying time, but not for long." A knock came at the door. The doctor entered, a middle-aged woman in a crisp white coat. "Good morning," she said, scanning the chart. "Mrs. Blackwell." "Whitmore," Robert interrupted. The doctor looked up. "Of course. Miss Whitmore, your condition is stable. The ultrasound shows no internal injury to the baby, but you need complete rest." She hesitated. "Your husband has requested an early discharge." Rachel's face went pale. "He what?" The doctor sighed. "He insists you'll receive private care at home. He's already signed preliminary papers." Robert stood, anger flashing in his eyes. "That man is not taking her anywhere. She stays under hospital supervision until I say otherwise. The doctor hesitated. Sir, he's listed as next of kin. Not anymore, Robert said sharply. You'll find a court order by tomorrow morning changing that. His tone carried authority that no one dared to question. The doctor nodded slowly. I'll delay the discharge request. She left the room quietly. Rachel turned to him, her voice trembling. He's not going to stop. I know, Robert said, but neither will I. She looked at him, her eyes tired but resolute. What are you going to do? Finish what I should have done years ago, he said. Expose him. She hesitated. He'll ruin you again. Robert smiled faintly. I've already been ruined once. This time, it's his turn. Oh. The morning light grew stronger. Birds began to chirp faintly outside the window, the first sign that the storm had truly passed. Rachel rested her head against the pillow, exhaustion pulling at her. Promise me one thing, she murmured. Don't let anger destroy you. I want justice, not revenge. He nodded, his hand still holding hers. Justice is all I want too. Her eyelids fluttered. Sleep tugged at her, but she fought to stay awake a moment longer. What will you do first? Robert looked out the window where the city skyline shimmered in the mist. I'll make some calls, he said. Old friends, people who still owe me favors. We'll start with his company. Freeze his assets before he can use them against you. Rachel managed a small smile. That sounds like you. He brushed her hair back gently. Get some rest. The world can wait until you're stronger. Her breathing slowed. The room dimmed as she drifted into sleep. Robert sat in silence, watching her chest rise and fall. For the first time in years, he felt something close to hope. But when he turned to leave, he noticed a man in a dark suit standing at the end of the hall, watching the room. Their eyes met for a split second before the man turned and walked away. Robert's expression hardened. He knew Ethan's reach still lingered even here. He closed the door gently and whispered to the sleeping woman inside. Rest while you can, Rachel. I'll keep the wolves away. Outside, the clouds began to break apart, and the first clean light of morning flooded the city. The morning after Rachel's release from the hospital, Charleston woke to a headline that silenced the entire city. Judge Robert Whitmore returns, demands justice for daughter assaulted by real estate magnate. The news spread faster than the tide. Every television channel replayed the same footage. The once revered Ethan Blackwell storming past reporters while flashing cameras reflected off his car windows. Behind those images was a quieter, sharper story. The return of a man Charleston thought had vanished forever. Robert Whitmore stood at a podium in front of his family's foundation building. His silver hair gleamed beneath the morning sun, and his voice carried the calm power of a man who had once ruled a courtroom. No amount of wealth, he said, can bury the truth. My daughter was attacked, and this city deserves to see who Ethan Blackwell truly is. His words struck like thunder. For years, Charleston's elite had whispered that Robert's disappearance was tied to corruption or scandal. Now they saw a man risen from the shadows, armed with evidence and purpose. Reporters shouted questions. Judge Whitmore, are you accusing Ethan Blackwell of attempted murder? Robert paused, choosing his words carefully. I am accusing him of believing he could buy justice, and I am here to remind him that justice cannot be purchased. The crowd erupted. Every major network aired his statement by noon. Across the city, business owners and investors who once courted Ethan began to withdraw. The board of his company, Blackwell Developments, called for an emergency meeting. Within hours, the company's stock dropped 12%. Behind closed doors, lawyers scrambled to contain the damage. Inside his penthouse office overlooking the harbor, Ethan watched the coverage in silence. The television light flickered across his face, turning his expression cold and unreadable. Camila Rhodes stood beside him, scrolling through social media on her phone. It's everywhere, she said nervously. Your name, your face, that video from the hospital. Ethan didn't turn his head. It will pass, he said. Camila hesitated. Robert Whitmore isn't some blogger. He's a retired federal judge. People trust him. Ethan finally looked at her. His eyes were like steel. People fear me more than they trust him. He poured himself a drink, the sound of ice against glass filling the silence. He's been gone 20 years. He thinks this city still belongs to men like him. It doesn't. But he's already frozen one of your accounts, Camila said quietly. The Whitmore Foundation bought half the land near your new project. Ethan slammed the glass down, spilling whiskey across his desk. That land is worthless without my permits. He leaned closer, his tone sharp. And I'll have them. I always do. Camila said nothing, but the tremor in her hand betrayed her doubt. That afternoon, Robert met with his legal advisor at the foundation headquarters. Stacks of documents covered the oak table. He's using shell companies to hide his money, said Daniel Hayes, a journalist turned legal consultant. If we expose those transfers, his empire will crumble. Robert nodded. We start by cutting off his oxygen. Money is power, and I'm taking that from him first. And, Daniel studied him carefully. You're prepared for what's coming? He won't stay silent. Robert's eyes hardened. Neither will I. Later that evening, Rachel watched the press conference replay on television from her mother's house. She sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. Grace Whitmore sat beside her, silent but steady. The sound of her father's voice filled the living room. Rachel's eyes welled with tears. He shouldn't have done this for me, she said softly. Grace placed her hand over Rachel's. He's not doing it just for you. He's doing it for every woman who was told to be quiet. Rachel stared at the television. Ethan will come for him. He won't stop. Grace's voice was firm. Your father has spent his whole life facing men like Ethan. Let him do what he was born to do. Across town, Ethan's team of lawyers gathered around the long glass table in his penthouse. One of them, a sharp young attorney, broke the uneasy silence. Mr. Blackwell, with respect, the best strategy is to control the story. We release a statement saying your wife suffered a fall. We emphasize your commitment to her recovery. Ethan's jaw flexed. And if that doesn't work, then we make her look unstable, another lawyer said cautiously. There are already whispers about postpartum depression, stress from the pregnancy. The public will believe it if we guide the narrative. Huh. Camila shifted uncomfortably. You can't do that. She's carrying your child. Ethan turned toward her, his expression sharp. She's carrying my problem, he said quietly. The room froze. If the press wants a story, we'll give them one. The perfect husband caring for his troubled wife. Make the world pity me. The lawyers nodded. Within hours, an official statement appeared on national news. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell ask for privacy during this difficult time. Reports of violence are false. Mrs. Blackwell has been suffering from emotional exhaustion. Social media exploded again, divided between sympathy and outrage. Some believed Ethan, others did not. But the damage had already been done to his reputation. The next morning, Robert met Rachel at the foundation office. She looked fragile but determined, wearing a pale coat and carrying her medical file. He embraced her gently. You shouldn't be here, he said. I need to be, she replied. This is my fight too. Hell. Robert studied her face. There was something new in her expression, something steady and fierce. Then we do it together, he said. Through the window behind them, the city stretched toward the harbor, golden in the late afternoon light. But beyond that beauty lay the quiet tension of a storm about to break again. Ethan still held power. He still had allies buried deep in Charleston's elite. Robert knew this battle was only beginning, but for the first time in decades, he felt alive. That night, as the city lights flickered over the water, he stood on the balcony of his townhouse, phone pressed to his ear. It's time, he said to the contact on the other end. File the injunction. Freeze every account under his name. When he hung up, he looked toward the skyline where the Blackwell Tower glowed like a crown above the city. His reflection stared back in the glass door, older, wearier, but unbroken. You built your kingdom on sand, Ethan, he whispered. And I'm the tide. No. Far below, in the penthouse across the bay, Ethan stood before his window, unaware that the walls of his empire had already begun to crack. The following week brought a tense stillness to Charleston. The city's skyline shimmered under clear skies, but beneath the calm, rumors spread like wildfire. Everyone wanted to know how much truth hid behind Robert Whitmore's accusations, investors whispered. Journalists circled. Ethan Blackwell had gone silent, but silence was its own confession. Inside the Whitmore Foundation building, the atmosphere was electric. Papers, files, and old court records covered the long mahogany table. Daniel Hayes sat behind a laptop, typing fast, while the glow from the screen lit his tired eyes. He was no longer just a journalist chasing headlines. He was part of something larger, something dangerous. Robert entered the room carrying a folder marked Blackwell Holdings. He placed it on the table and spoke with quiet precision. "This is where we start. Every dollar he moved, every deal he forged, every lie he buried." Daniel nodded. "I've been tracing wire transfers through his shell corporations. He uses fake charities to hide offshore accounts. The money moves in circles: Spain, the Cayman Islands, back to South Carolina. It's clean on paper, but rotten underneath." Robert leaned over his shoulder, reading the lines of data. "He's laundering money through his own foundation," he said. "The one that claims to fund low-income housing." "That's the one," Daniel confirmed. "It's all a facade. Half the projects never broke ground." Rachel entered quietly. She wore a pale gray coat, her face still pale but her eyes focused. "How bad is it?" she asked. Robert looked up. "Bad enough to bury him." Rachel moved closer to the table. "Then why hasn't anyone done it yet?" Daniel exhaled. "Because he owns half the city. Judges, council members, inspectors, they all owe him favors. But now that your father's back, people are nervous. They're willing to talk." Robert nodded. "We don't just need gossip. We need hard proof." He opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. "This man," he said, pointing to a face with a scar over his brow, "was one of Ethan's financial officers 10 years ago. He disappeared after a fraud investigation." Daniel frowned. "You think Ethan silenced him?" "I think he paid him to vanish," Robert said. "Find him." Rachel listened quietly. The hum of the city outside drifted through the tall windows. "You think all this started because of money," she said softly. "But it didn't. It started because he thought he could own people." Robert looked at her, recognizing the strength in her voice. "You sound like your mother." She smiled faintly. "She always said money only buys noise, never peace." The moment hung in the air until Daniel broke it. "I have another lead," he said. "A developer named Mason Lee. He worked under Ethan for years. If we can get him to talk, the rest of the dominoes will fall." Robert picked up his phone. "Then let's pay Mr. Lee a visit." 2 hours later, they stood in front of a worn-out office building near the old shipyard. The sign read, "Lee Construction Consultants." Inside, the air smelled of dust and coffee. Mason Lee, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, sat behind a cluttered desk. When he saw Robert, his expression shifted from curiosity to fear. "I've already told the investigators everything," Mason said quickly. "You told them nothing," Robert replied, "because Ethan still controls them." He laid a single photograph on the desk, Ethan shaking hands with a city inspector. "He used your name on fraudulent permits. You could face charges unless you cooperate." Mason swallowed hard. "You think I wanted any part of that? He ruined me. I lost everything." "Then help us stop him," Robert said. Mason hesitated, his hands trembling. "If I talk, he'll come after me." Rachel stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm. "He already came after me, and I survived." Mason looked at her for a long moment. Something in her gaze steadied him. "All right," he said finally. "There's a storage unit on Riverfront Drive. It has files, real ones. Contracts, bank ledgers, transfer records. I kept copies because I didn't trust him." Daniel wrote the address down quickly. "How do we get in?" Mason handed him a small brass key. "Unit 17. But be careful, he still checks that property." They left the office without another word. As the car rolled down Riverfront Drive, the sky darkened with the first hint of rain. Rachel stared out the window, her reflection blurring against the glass. "Why did you trust him, Dad?" she asked quietly. "Back then," Robert kept his eyes on the road, "because I saw a little of myself in him. Ambitious, charming. I mistook hunger for vision." "And when did you see the truth?" she asked. "The day I realized he didn't want success," he said. "He wanted control." When they reached the storage complex, the air smelled of sea salt and wet concrete. Daniel unlocked the gate while Robert kept watch. Inside, the unit stood in a long line, their metal doors rusted and numbered. The rain began to fall harder, echoing on the tin roof. Rachel followed closely behind. As Daniel opened Unit 17, the smell of old paper and mildew filled the air. Inside were boxes stacked to the ceiling. Robert pulled one open and lifted out a binder. The label read Blackwell Trust, 2018. Daniel flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. "These are transfers from the Whitmore Trust Fund," he said. "Ethan siphoned money from your foundation years ago." Robert's face went rigid. "He used my own name," he said quietly. "He forged my signature." "Yuck." Rachel stepped closer, her hand trembling over the papers. "He stole from you. From us." Daniel turned another page. "It's all here. Proof of money laundering, tax fraud, bribery, enough to destroy his entire network." Robert closed the binder slowly. "Then we'll take it to the authorities." But Daniel hesitated. "If we go too soon, he'll cover his tracks. We need to leak parts of it first. Force him to panic. The media will circle, and then he'll make mistakes." Robert nodded after a moment. "Do it, but carefully." As they loaded the evidence into boxes, the storm outside grew heavier. Lightning flashed through the small window, illuminating their faces. Rachel picked up one of the binders and pressed it to her chest. "This isn't just about revenge anymore," she said quietly. "It's about truth." Robert looked at her. Truth is always the most dangerous weapon. When they returned to the car, Daniel started the engine. Rain streamed across the windshield in silver sheets. "I'll start analyzing these tonight," he said. "By morning, we'll know exactly where his empire begins to crack." Robert stared out into the storm. "Good," he said softly, "because tomorrow the whole city will see what kind of man Ethan Blackwell really is." Lightning lit the sky above the harbor as they drove away. Behind them, the storage unit door rattled in the wind, but the evidence inside no longer belonged to darkness. It belonged to justice. The day of the investor conference arrived with the weight of something inevitable. Charleston glimmered under a false calm, the kind that comes before a storm. Inside the Whitmore Foundation's glass atrium, rows of white chairs faced a large projection screen. The city's most powerful business figures filled the seats, unaware they had been invited into a trap. The air was cool and professional, but beneath it pulsed quiet tension. Robert Whitmore stood near the podium, reviewing a folder one last time. His posture was calm, his tone measured, but every gesture carried precision. "Everything is in place?" he asked. Daniel Hayes nodded. "The cameras are live. Every word will stream directly to the press. Ethan thinks this is about a partnership meeting. He has no idea he's walking into his own confession." Rachel entered through the side door. She looked pale but strong, dressed in a tailored navy dress. The scars on her wrists had faded, but the memory of that night had not. "Are you sure we have enough evidence to make him talk?" she asked quietly. Robert looked at her. "We have the truth, Rachel. That's always enough for a guilty man," Daniel added. "The moment he feels cornered, he'll lash out. We just need to let him hang himself with his own words." The hum of voices outside grew louder. Reporters were gathering in the lobby, their cameras waiting. The city wanted a show, and Ethan Blackwell never disappointed them. When the clock struck 11, the doors opened. Ethan walked in, surrounded by his assistants and two of his lawyers. His suit was impeccable, his smile carefully rehearsed. Camila Rhodes followed half a step behind, her red dress cutting through the neutral tones of the room. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like small, precise strikes. Robert greeted him with the smooth courtesy of a seasoned judge. "Ethan, thank you for coming. I thought it was time we discussed the future of this city's development plans." Ethan gave a small, tight smile. "I'm surprised to see you hosting anything, Robert. I thought retirement meant peace, not war." Robert returned the smile, calm and unreadable. Peace and justice are often the same thing. Ethan looked around the room, his eyes narrowing slightly as he noticed the cameras mounted on the walls. "Quite an audience you've invited," he said. "Is this an investors' meeting or a performance?" "Both," Robert said simply. As everyone took their seats, Daniel adjusted the projector behind the curtain. The opening slide appeared on the screen. Charleston Redevelopment Initiative, Transparency and Ethics in Business. The title itself was bait. Ethan smirked, confident as ever. Robert began the presentation with a steady voice. "For decades, this city has trusted its wealth to men who build empires out of promises. But some empires are built on stolen foundations." The audience shifted uneasily. Ethan's smile thinned. "Is there a point to this sermon, Robert?" Robert turned a page in his notes. "There is. Every partnership is built on trust, and when that trust is violated, Truth must take its place. He nodded slightly toward Daniel. The lights dimmed. The projector flickered. A series of documents filled the screen. Bank statements, signatures, offshore transfers, all bearing Ethan's name. The room fell silent. "What is this?" Ethan demanded. Robert didn't look up. "Evidence. Transfers from Blackwell Holdings to shell corporations in Spain, the Cayman Islands, and Dubai. All traced back to accounts you opened under false charities, the same accounts that received stolen funds from my foundation." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras clicked. Camila's face went pale. "Ethan," she whispered, "you told me those were private investments." Ethan's voice rose. "This is slander." Robert's tone remained even. "It's truth. We have copies of every transaction, confirmed by your own accountant." Ethan turned sharply toward Daniel. "You think I'll let you destroy me with fake numbers?" Daniel met his glare without flinching. "They're not fake. They're yours." The tension snapped. Ethan's composure cracked for the first time. "You think you can humiliate me in front of these people?" His voice echoed across the atrium. "You don't know what it takes to build power. You sit behind desks and judge men who actually make things happen." Robert's voice was low, but commanding. "Building power by breaking lives is not creation, Ethan. It's destruction." Ethan stepped closer, pointing a trembling finger. "You talk about justice, but you're no saint. You left your own daughter unprotected." The words cut through the air. Rachel's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "You hurt me," she said softly, her voice steady. "And you still think you're the victim?" Her calmness enraged him. "You think anyone cares about your pity story?" he shouted. "You fell down the stairs because you were weak. You made me do it." The room froze. Cameras clicked in a frenzy. Robert's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't speak. Ethan realized too late what he had said. The color drained from his face. Robert leaned forward. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's all I needed." "No." Daniel pressed a button on the laptop. Every word had been recorded and broadcast live. The confession played back through the speakers, echoing across the room. "You fell down the stairs because you were weak. You made me do it." The reporters outside began shouting questions, their microphones raised high. Ethan turned toward the doors, panic flashing across his face. Camila backed away, her expression a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Ethan," she whispered, "you just confessed." "Lou?" He grabbed her arm, desperate. "Don't you dare turn on me!" She pulled free and walked out, the click of her heels sharp against the marble. Ethan turned toward Robert, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you've won? You can't destroy me." Robert stood tall, his voice calm and final. "I don't have to. You already did." Security guards entered the room. The audience parted as they approached. Ethan looked around the room full of flashing lights and whispers. The empire he had built on lies was collapsing in real time. Rachel stepped forward. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about truth. You taught me how easily power can turn to cruelty, but now everyone knows who you are." Ethan's shoulders sagged. He turned toward Robert one last time, his voice low and hollow. "You think this is over?" Robert met his eyes. "For you, it just ended." The guards led Ethan toward the exit. The reporters followed, shouting questions into the noise. Rain began to fall again outside, tapping against the glass walls. Inside the atrium, silence returned. Rachel exhaled slowly, her hands trembling, but her face was calm. Daniel turned off the projector. Robert looked around the room that had just witnessed justice take its first step. "Now," he said quietly, "we let the law finish what the truth began." Outside, the storm broke fully, rain sweeping across the city. The Whitmore Foundation's flag fluttered in the wind, bright against the gray sky, a sign that justice, once awakened, would not sleep again. The storm that followed the conference refused to die quietly. All across Charleston, televisions replayed Ethan Blackwell's furious confession. Every word he had shouted at the Whitmore Foundation echoed through the city like a warning from the past. His voice was raw, filled with arrogance and fear, and now the entire world had heard it. The media called it the fall of Charleston's golden sun. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered beneath umbrellas as police cars arrived at dawn. Reporters shouted over each other, their cameras flashing through the gray drizzle. Ethan's name trended across every network. His empire was collapsing faster than anyone thought possible. Inside the penthouse, Ethan sat alone at his desk, his eyes hollow from a sleepless night. The once polished room looked stripped of life. Bottles lay empty beside a half-finished glass of whiskey. The television on the wall played the morning news, showing his face beside the headline, "Blackwell under federal investigation." Camilla Rhodes stood near the door, wearing the same red dress from the night before. Her mascara had smudged, and her voice trembled. "They're outside, Ethan! The police! You need to leave before—" He cut her off sharply. "Before what? Before they humiliate me more than I already have been?" He slammed the glass against the table, shattering it. "Do you think I'll run like a coward?" Camilla stepped back, fear flickering in her eyes. "I think you already have," she whispered. He glared at her, then turned toward the window. The skyline that once belonged to him now looked distant, cold, and foreign. "I built this city," he said softly. "And now they treat me like a criminal." Camilla's voice rose. "You are a criminal, Ethan. You hurt her. You lied to everyone. You made me lie for you." He spun toward her, his voice like a whip. "Get out." Tears filled her eyes. "You used me. You promised everything would be different." "Out," he repeated, his tone icy. She hesitated for a second, then grabbed her coat and ran toward the elevator. The doors closed behind her, leaving Ethan in silence. Down on the street, police cruisers blocked the entrance. Reporters pressed against the barricades, their microphones raised. Rain pooled in the cracks of the pavement. Two detectives stepped out of a black sedan, one of them holding a warrant. Inside, Ethan paced like a caged animal. He could hear the faint echo of sirens growing louder. He loosened his tie, straightened his jacket, and forced the calm expression that had once fooled everyone. The knock on the door came hard and final. "Ethan Blackwell," a voice called. "Charleston Police, open up." He opened the door slowly, pretending control. "Gentlemen," he said, "you must be mistaken. Detective Daniel Moore held up the papers. "We're not. You're under arrest for fraud, assault, and tax evasion." Ethan smirked faintly. "Assault? You mean my wife's performance for the cameras?" The detective's tone stayed even. "Save it for court." Two officers stepped forward, placing handcuffs around his wrists. The metallic click echoed through the hallway. For the first time, Ethan's confidence cracked. He looked around the room that had once been his kingdom, the paintings, the glass, the gold, and realized none of it could save him. As they led him through the lobby, the elevator doors opened. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Blackwell, did you push your wife? Is it true you stole from the Whitmore Foundation? Do you have any comment for Judge Whitmore?" Ethan kept his head high, forcing a smile that barely held. "No comment," he said through clenched teeth. Outside, rain fell harder. The crowd pressed closer as the officers guided him to the waiting car. Someone shouted, "Justice for Rachel!" The chant caught on, spreading through the crowd. "Justice for Rachel! Justice for Rachel!" For a moment, Ethan's mask slipped completely. His eyes filled with fury, but no one saw remorse. Across the city, Rachel watched the arrest unfold on television. She was sitting in her father's townhouse, a blanket around her shoulders, the baby's soft heartbeat steady beneath her hand. When the image of Ethan in handcuffs filled the screen, she didn't smile. She only exhaled. Robert entered the room quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her and watched the screen in silence. "They finally have him," Rachel said. Robert nodded slowly. "It's not over yet, but justice has begun." She turned to him. "Do you ever stop thinking about it? About everything he took from us?" He shook his head. "No, but I've learned that anger is a heavy thing to carry. Today we put it down." Her eyes softened. "For now." Later that afternoon, the courthouse steps were packed with reporters. Police escorted Ethan through the rain toward the entrance. His expensive shoes splashed through puddles as he tried to shield himself from the flashing cameras. Camilla stood at the edge of the crowd, her red umbrella trembling in her hand. Their eyes met for a split second. She turned away. Inside the courthouse, Ethan was processed and led into a holding room. The walls were bare, the air stale. Across the hallway, Daniel Hayes stood watching through the glass. He spoke quietly into his phone. "It's done," he said. "He's in custody." Robert's voice came through the receiver. "Good work. Now make sure the evidence gets to the federal office by morning." Daniel hung up and looked at Ethan through the glass. The once celebrated businessman now sat slumped in a plastic chair, his wrists marked from the cuffs. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, Ethan had bought his way out of everything. Now no amount of money could open a single door. As dusk fell, the rain began to ease. Outside the courthouse, Rachel arrived with her father. Reporters turned their cameras toward them, but Robert raised a hand for silence. "We're not here for celebration," he said. "We're here for closure." Rachel looked up at the courthouse windows. Somewhere inside, the man who once controlled her life sat in chains. She thought of the night he pushed her, the cold marble against her back, the rain soaking her skin. The memory was no longer pain. It was proof. Robert placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "He can't hurt you again," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I'll never forget what it took to stop him." They walked down the courthouse steps together as the sun broke through the clouds. The wet streets glowed in golden light. Across the city, church bells began to ring. At that same moment, inside the holding cell, Ethan stared through the bars. The sound of bells reached him faintly, soft and distant. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of silence. No assistants, no lawyers, no allies, only the echo of his own downfall. The guard opened the door. "They're ready for you," he said. Ethan stood, his wrists trembling as he steadied himself. As he walked down the hallway, his reflection followed in the glass. No longer the face of Charleston's golden sun, but the shadow of what pride and cruelty had built. Outside, thunder rolled once more over the harbor, and the wind carried away the last fragments of his empire. The courthouse of Charleston stood heavy with history that morning. Its white columns rose above the square like pillars of judgment, and the marble steps glistened from the night's rain. Inside, the air carried the hum of anticipation. Reporters filled every bench, their pens ready to capture the downfall of a man who once ruled the city's skyline. Ethan Blackwell sat at the defendant's table in a dark suit that no longer fit him with the same arrogance. His hair was unkempt, his jaw tight, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Handcuffs had left faint red marks on his wrists. Around him, lawyers shuffled papers and whispered strategies, but he didn't hear them. The world he built had collapsed in a single week, and the weight of it sat squarely on his chest. Across the room, Rachel Whitmore entered with her father. The murmurs rose as people recognized her. She moved carefully, her hand resting against her stomach, her face composed but pale. Robert walked beside her, his expression controlled, every step steady. The two took their seats in the front row, the quiet center of the storm. Judge Harriet Collins entered, her black robe trailing behind her as the courtroom fell into silence. The bailiff called the session to order. "All rise." The sound of chairs scraping filled the air. "The case of the state of South Carolina versus Ethan Blackwell will now commence." The prosecutor, a young woman with a firm voice, rose from her seat. "Your Honor, the evidence presented before this court will show a deliberate pattern of deceit, abuse, and financial corruption carried out by the defendant, Ethan Blackwell." Her words were sharp and deliberate. "We will prove that his crimes extend beyond greed. They are acts of cruelty against the people he deceived and the woman he vowed to protect." Ethan's attorney, a seasoned man with graying hair, stood next. His tone was smooth, but even he sounded tired. "Your Honor, the defense maintains that my client has been misrepresented in the court of public opinion. We will show that what happened between Mr. Blackwell and his wife was an unfortunate accident, not a crime." A ripple of disbelief passed through the courtroom. Rachel kept her gaze fixed on the wooden floor, her fingers tightening around the edge of her chair. The prosecutor called her first witness, Mrs. Rachel Whitmore. Rachel stood slowly, walked to the witness stand, and took the oath. The courtroom lights seemed too bright. Her voice was quiet but unwavering as she began. "I was 7 months pregnant when it happened," she said. "We were at his gala. I walked in and saw him with another woman. When I confronted him, he lost control." "Huh." The prosecutor nodded gently. "What did he do?" Rachel's voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. "He pushed me. Hard. I fell down the stairs. I remember the marble floor, the sound of my body hitting it. I remember thinking the baby was gone." Ethan's lawyer stood. "Objection! Emotionally charged testimony." The judge shook her head. "Overruled. The witness may continue." Rachel looked toward the defense table. Ethan avoided her eyes, his jaw tight. "He told me to get out," she said. "He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't help me. He threw me into the rain." The room went silent, except for the faint sound of camera shutters clicking in the back. When the prosecutor asked how she survived, Rachel's gaze shifted toward her father. "My dad found me. He called for help. He saved my life." The prosecutor nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore." She turned toward the judge. "The state rests this portion of the testimony." Ethan's attorney rose slowly. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've been under tremendous stress, haven't you?" Rachel looked at him calmly. "I have. And it's possible your memory of that night could be affected by trauma?" Her answer came without hesitation. "I remember pain. I remember fear. And I remember him standing over me, telling me to get out. That's not something you forget." The attorney hesitated, then nodded. No further questions. Rachel stepped down. The courtroom watched her walk back to her seat, every movement quiet and deliberate. Next came the financial evidence. Daniel Hayes took the stand, explaining how Ethan had used fake charities and offshore accounts to steal from the Whitmore Foundation and the city's housing programs. Charts and records appeared on the screen behind him. The amounts were staggering. Millions moved in secret, all tied to Ethan's signature. The prosecutor turned to the jury. This man didn't just abuse power in his home. He abused it across an entire city. And when confronted with truth, he lashed out violently to protect his empire. Ethan's attorney tried to object, but the judge silenced him. "Let the prosecution finish." Then came the moment that shifted the room. The prosecutor played the recording from the conference. Ethan's voice filled the courtroom, cold and furious. "You fell down the stairs because you were weak. You made me do it." "No." Gasps spread through the benches. Ethan's head snapped up, rage flashing in his eyes. "That recording was manipulated," he shouted. "Enough," the judge warned. "One more outburst and you'll be removed." Robert leaned slightly toward Rachel. "It's over," he whispered. The prosecutor concluded her argument. Ethan Blackwell believed he could buy truth, silence victims, and control the law. Today, he learns he was wrong. The judge recessed for 1 hour before returning with her verdict. The air was heavy when everyone stood again. Ethan remained seated, his hands gripping the table. The bailiff called for silence. Judge Collins spoke slowly. "This court finds the defendant, Ethan Blackwell, guilty on all charges of fraud, money laundering, and aggravated assault." Her gavel struck once, the sound echoing through the marble chamber. Ethan's face went pale. The attorney beside him whispered something, but he didn't hear. Cameras flashed as officers approached. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, not of joy, but of relief. She looked at her father. "It's really done." Robert nodded. "Justice doesn't erase pain, it only ends the darkness that caused it." As Ethan was led away in handcuffs, reporters surged toward the exit. His final words were barely audible. "You think this is justice? You'll regret this." Robert stood, unshaken. "No, Ethan," he said softly. "Regret belongs to you." "No." Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The crowd that had gathered on the courthouse steps erupted into cheers. Rachel stepped into the light, closing her eyes as warm air brushed her face. She could hear the sound of the harbor nearby, calm and steady. For the first time in months, she could breathe. 3 days after the verdict, Charleston felt quieter than it had in months. The courthouse steps were empty now, washed clean by morning rain. The headlines that once screamed Ethan Blackwell's name had already begun to fade, replaced by new stories, new scandals. But for Rachel Whitmore, silence was not peace. It was the sound of everything she had survived finally settling around her. Inside the Whitmore townhouse, sunlight spilled across the living room floor. Rachel sat near the window, her hand resting on her stomach, listening to the steady rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat through the monitor beside her chair. The baby was still safe. Every sound reminded her of that small miracle. Across from her, Robert watched the morning news, his face unreadable. When the reporter announced Ethan's official sentence, 25 years with no chance of parole, he only nodded. "It's done," Rachel said softly. Robert turned toward her. "The trial is done. Justice isn't finished yet. It never really is." She looked at him carefully. "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. "No, but I wish it hadn't taken so long to do the right thing. Outside, church bells rang faintly through the city. It was Sunday, and Charleston was beginning to breathe again. Later that morning, they drove to St. Helena Church, the same church where Robert once stood decades ago to deliver verdicts that changed lives. Today he arrived not as a judge, but as a father seeking peace. Rachel walked beside him slowly, the hem of her pale dress brushing against the stone path. The air smelled faintly of rain and magnolia. Inside, Father Mark Leland waited near the altar. His eyes were kind, his presence calm. "You both look tired," he said gently. Robert smiled faintly. "Tired, yes, but lighter." The priest nodded. "Justice is heavy work. It always leaves its mark." 1. Rachel sat in the front pew and looked up at the stained glass above the altar. The sunlight poured through in colors that painted her face. "I thought I'd feel free," she said. "But it's not freedom. It's something else." "Forgiveness?" the priest asked. She hesitated. "Not yet. Maybe one day." Robert's voice softened. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means deciding to stop letting him live inside you." She turned toward him, her eyes glistening. "Then I'll start learning." After the service, they stepped outside. The clouds had parted, and sunlight shimmered across the wet streets. Reporters waited at a distance but didn't approach. The story had already been told. What came next belonged only to them. That afternoon, Robert drove them to the riverfront park overlooking the harbor. The air carried the scent of salt and wood. Families strolled along the path, children laughing in the distance. Rachel walked to the railing and leaned forward slightly, staring at the slow movement of the tide. "This is where you used to bring me," she said. "You said the water always knows how to start over." He nodded. "And it still does." Rachel's voice trembled. "Do you think he meant it? When he said he was sorry?" Robert thought for a moment before answering. "Men like Ethan are sorry for being caught, not for what they did. But that's his burden now, not yours." She looked at the water again. The reflection of the afternoon sun danced across its surface. "He said something before they took him away," she murmured. "He told me I'd regret this." Robert turned to her. "Do you?" "No," she said firmly. "Not for 1 second." The wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of a ship's horn. The city felt alive again, but differently, quieter, humbler. Rachel closed her eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in months, the air didn't taste of fear. That evening, the Whitmore townhouse was filled with visitors. Old friends, colleagues, and neighbors came by to offer congratulations, condolences, and everything in between. Grace Whitmore greeted them all with her calm smile, serving tea and keeping the conversations soft. Rachel sat by the fireplace, her hands folded around a cup of peppermint tea. The baby kicked once, a small reminder of life continuing forward. Daniel Hayes arrived last, carrying a folder under his arm. "I didn't come to talk business," he said as Robert opened the door. "I just thought you should see this." He handed Rachel a printed article. The headline read, "Blackwell's Assets Seized. Proceeds Donated to Whitmore Foundation." Rachel read it twice before looking up. "He built everything on stolen money. Now it's going back where it belongs." Daniel nodded. "The state made sure of that. And the foundation's expansion plans will go through next month. Your father's name will stand where his once did." Robert smiled faintly. "That's not revenge. That's balance." The three sat in silence for a moment. The clock in the hallway ticked softly. Daniel stood to leave. "Take care of yourself, Rachel. You've got a new life to build now." When he was gone, the house grew quiet again. Rachel looked at her father. "Do you think Mom would have been proud?" Robert's voice wavered slightly. "She'd be proud that you survived, and prouder still that you didn't lose your heart." Rachel set the article aside and leaned against his shoulder. "Then that's enough." Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. The city looked peaceful under the golden haze of dusk. Later that night, Rachel stood on the balcony alone. The harbor glowed in the distance, and the soft hum of the city carried through the air. She closed her eyes and thought of the courtroom, of Ethan's final look before they led him away. For the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man broken by his own choices. That thought didn't bring pity. It brought closure. Behind her, Robert stepped onto the balcony. He handed her a small box. Inside was the silver cross that once belonged to Grace. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he said. "She always believed light finds us again, even when we stop looking for it." Rachel fastened the chain around her neck. "It feels right," she whispered. He looked at her proudly. "Tomorrow we start the foundation in your name. It's time this city remembered that good can rise from ruin." She smiled faintly. "Then let's build something worth remembering." They stood together for a long moment, watching the moon rise over Charleston Harbor. The reflection of light rippled across the water, soft and steady, like the heartbeat of something reborn. Inside, the grandfather clock struck midnight. Rachel turned toward the sound, then back to the water. Her hand moved once more to her stomach. The baby kicked gently, and a smile touched her lips. She whispered into the quiet night, "We made it." The wind carried her words out over the water, where they disappeared into the horizon, gentle, certain, and free. 1 year later, Charleston breathed in the calm of a golden autumn morning. The harbor shimmered under soft sunlight, and the air carried the scent of fresh bread and falling leaves. The city that once trembled under scandal now stood still, its noise replaced by quiet admiration for the family that had restored its conscience. Across town, the newly renovated Whitmore Haven Foundation prepared for its grand opening. White ribbons fluttered gently in the breeze. Volunteers arranged flowers along the steps, and inside, warm light spilled across the polished marble floor. Rachel Whitmore stood before a mirror in her office upstairs. Her hair was longer now, her face fuller, her movements calm and steady. She wore an ivory suit that carried both grace and strength. Around her neck hung the silver cross her mother had once worn. Through the open window, she could hear the voices of visitors gathering below. She took a deep breath, resting one hand over her daughter's tiny fingers. Baby Grace slept soundly in a crib by the window, her small breath steady and pure. Robert entered quietly, his gray suit pressed, his eyes warm with pride. "They're waiting for you," he said. Rachel turned, her smile gentle. "I know, but I just needed 1 more minute." She looked at her daughter again. "For her," Robert's voice softened. "She's the reason you're still standing." Rachel nodded. "She's the reason I can finally breathe." Together they walked down the grand staircase into the main hall. Guests filled every seat, judges, doctors, teachers, and women from across the state who had written letters after her story went public. Some had suffered in silence for years, others had found courage through her name. As Rachel appeared, the room fell into a respectful hush. Father Mark Leland stood near the podium, his black cassock brightened by a white stole embroidered with gold. When Rachel reached the podium, he smiled and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Before this building becomes a refuge, let it first become a symbol," he said. "A symbol that truth may be bruised, but it never dies." Applause filled the hall, soft at first, then growing stronger. Rachel stepped to the microphone. Her voice carried calm authority, but beneath it was emotion that could not be disguised. "1 year ago," she began, "my life collapsed. I lost my home, my name, and almost my child. But through that darkness, I learned something important. Pain does not destroy you, it reshapes you. And when it's done, you no longer fear the storm." Her words held the room still. "This foundation," she continued, "is not built on anger, it's built on hope. For every woman told to stay quiet, for every child who learned fear instead of love, for every person who was told that power means silence. We're here to prove otherwise." Robert stood at the back, his eyes glistening with quiet pride. For him, the speech was more than public redemption. It was his daughter's rebirth. Rachel paused, her gaze drifting toward the photographs displayed along the wall, images of the journey that had brought them here. One showed her in the hospital, holding newborn Grace. Another showed her standing beside her father at the courthouse steps. The last image was of the foundation's construction site at sunrise. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "For those who rise again." "Some people asked why I named this place Whitmore Haven," she said. "It isn't because of our family name. It's because everyone deserves a haven, a place where they are seen, heard, and protected. A place that reminds us that justice does not end in court. It lives in compassion." The audience applauded again, louder this time. Father Leland stepped forward, raising a small glass lantern from the altar beside him. Inside, it burned a steady flame. "This light," he said, "was taken from the altar of St. Helena Church, where Rachel first found peace after her trial. Today, It will burn here as a reminder that no darkness lasts forever." Rachel accepted the lantern and placed it on a pedestal at the center of the hall. The flame reflected in her eyes. "For every woman who walks through these doors," she said softly, "let this light remind her that she is not alone." When the applause subsided, she cut the ceremonial ribbon with silver scissors. The sound of it breaking echoed like a soft promise. Guests began to explore the rooms beyond, offices for legal aid, counseling centers, and a nursery for mothers rebuilding their lives. Volunteers welcomed them warmly, guiding them through the new space. As the crowd dispersed into quiet conversations, Rachel found herself standing by one of the tall windows overlooking the courtyard. The magnolia trees had begun to turn gold, their petals drifting slowly toward the cobblestones below. Beside her, Robert joined her in silence. "She would have loved this," he said, referring to Grace Whitmore, the woman they both still missed. Rachel nodded, her eyes softening. "Mom always believed that kindness was the most powerful form of justice." "She was right," Robert said. Across the courtyard, Daniel Hayes arrived carrying a small box. "I thought you might want to see this," he said, handing it to Rachel. Inside was a framed letter from the governor, acknowledging the foundation's role in improving women's safety laws. At the bottom was a gold seal and a simple message, "In honor of courage born from truth." Rachel smiled faintly. "I never wanted fame, just meaning." Daniel grinned. "You got both." Outside, the afternoon sun deepened into amber. Guests began to leave, one by one, shaking hands and offering blessings. Father Leland paused by the door and turned back. "You gave the city back its conscience," he said. Rachel met his gaze. "I just followed the light." As dusk settled, she carried baby Grace into the courtyard. The lanterns along the walls glowed softly, their light mingling with the fading warmth of the Sunday. Robert followed, standing a few steps behind, as Rachel placed her daughter's tiny hand against the plaque. "This is for you," she whispered. "So you'll grow up knowing that truth always wins, even when it takes time." The baby cooed softly, the sound small but bright. Rachel looked up at the sky where the first stars had begun to appear. The air was cool, filled with the smell of wet stone and autumn leaves. Behind her, Robert spoke quietly. "If we had arrived earlier that night," he said, his voice heavy with old guilt, "maybe none of this would have happened." Rachel turned to him. "If you had arrived earlier, maybe I wouldn't have learned what I was meant to become." He smiled through the ache in his heart. "Then I'll stop wishing for what's past." She stepped closer, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. "You already made it right." As night fell over Charleston, the foundation glowed from within, its windows shining like beacons across the quiet streets. Inside, the eternal flame flickered beside the marble inscription, "From darkness, light." Rachel stood in the doorway for a final moment, holding her daughter close. "We made it, Mom," she whispered, "and this time, the light stays on." The camera of life pulled back slowly, over the courtyard, over the rooftops, over the harbor, revealing a city at peace. The waves below shimmered under the moonlight, and in the heart of Charleston, the Whitmore Haven Foundation stood as proof that justice, once awakened, can become love.